Mr. President.
The senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, thank you very much for that recognition. Last month, both the Senate and the House of Representatives resolved on a bipartisan basis to terminate the President's declaration of a national emergency along our southern border. I was proud to lead the charge before this body to terminate that declaration, a declaration the President is using to raid congressionally appropriated military construction funds to build this border wall. Plain and simple, the President's emergency declaration is an end run around Congress's spending powers and the Constitution. Last week, a federal district judge has agreed and concluded the President's declaration is, quote, unlawful. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution could not be clearer. It reads, and I quote, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. The founders gave Congress the power to appropriate, the power of the purse. This is one of the most consequential powers. Congress has this power to make sure decisions about how public dollars are spent have widespread support and are not the product of an extreme minority, let alone one man. Our power to appropriate is part of the system of checks and balances built into our Constitution. The founders made sure that the three branches of government exercise their own separate and limited powers. And they made sure that no one branch and no one person could exercise too much power, especially over the use of taxpayer money. The President's emergency declaration is an unconstitutional power grab. Congress has not fully funded his requests for border wall funding. We set different budget priorities. Our priorities include the $3.6 billion worth of 127 military construction projects across 23 states, 3 territories, and 20 countries, and the President canceled them. But this President will not accept Congress's judgment or our constitutional authority. His emergency declaration is an exercise of power that is just not his under the Constitution. But our system and checks and balances only works if each branch has the will to check the other branch, if there is encroachment. And we've seen some good bipartisan pushback, but this is the point where we need more of that. It's up to Congress, the legislative branch, to guard our constitutional authority and to exercise the will to do so. The President has now vetoed Congress's resolution, and it's up to this body to assert our constitutional authority and override that veto. Not only is it a fundamental constitutional principle at stake, the President's emergency declaration has real-life impacts to our national security and impacts to the 23 states whose projects are now gone. My home state of New Mexico is one of those 23 states. We're home to 2 military bases that will be hit by the President's raid on military construction projects to fund his wall. Scuttled is an $85 million project at Holloman Air Force Base that would improve drone pilot training facilities that are aging, have sinkholes, and bat infestation. Training our military to pilot drones is mission critical in this day and age. The Air Force is battling a shortage of these pilots. At White Sands Missile Range, a $40 million project designed to replace an aging and fire-damaged information systems facility has been cut. This project was was to prepare the range to take on the next generation of missile and weapons testing, including future hypersonic testing. 22 other states are losing military construction projects, from Alabama to Arizona, North Carolina to Texas, and Maine to Florida. In Utah, the Air Force has sought a new control center at Hill Air Force Base to replace, quote, structurally deficient, dilapidated World War II era warehouses for mission control. In Louisiana, the Air National Guard sought to replace an aircraft parking ramp in a New Orleans facility that exposes the public to a, quote, unacceptable risk of being impacted by an explosive accident. In Indiana, Army service members have worked in violation of safety standards for handling explosives and need additional space for munitions. In Kentucky, the military seeks to repair, and I quote here, substandard, deficient, inadequate, and undersized facilities at a middle school at Fort Campbell that impairs the overall education program for the children of service members. But, Mr. President, not only is New Mexico one of the states hit by the president canceling important military construction projects, we are one of 4 states that borders Mexico. We are ground zero for the president's border wall and the havoc it will wreak on our communities, our way of life, local economies, landowners, and the environment. New Mexico and Mexico share a 180-mile border. This border passes through 3 counties, Doñana, Luna, and Hidalgo, that are home to 11% of our state's population. A majority of the population in those counties is Hispanic. We have vibrant communities along the border and near the border, including our second largest city, Las Cruces, 45 minutes from Mexico. We have 2 ports of entry in Columbus and Santa Teresa that are bustling with commerce, international trade, and hundreds who cross the border daily to visit family and friends, to go to school, and to shop. I know our border communities. I can tell you for a fact there is no justification for the diversion of military construction funding away from our troops and to this wall. Now, I support smart border security and have voted many times to fund smart investments. New Mexico knows what real border security is. Well-funded, well-trained, adequate resources, mobile assets, surveillance technology, combined with well-staffed ports of entry that welcome commerce, visitors, and also asylum seekers seeking refuge from horrific persecution. But the president's wall, at upwards of $25 million per mile, is not a smart investment. It's antiquated. It's not designed for today's challenges. This wasteful approach contrasts to the sound investment we made in the Columbus port of entry. Commerce, personal vehicle traffic, and foot traffic have increased exponentially over the years. Customs and Border Protection needed more secure facilities. We pushed to expand and update this New Mexico port. For $90 million, we greatly enhanced border security and added to economic growth. Now that's a wise investment of taxpayer dollars. In New Mexico, we're concerned about the land grab underway by this administration. They are pushing to expropriate private lands from the president's wall, for the president's wall, and there are lots of landowners who don't want their lands cut in half or made unusable. We can't get answers from the administration about what they're doing. And so Senator Heinrich and I, along with Senator Schumer and Senator Dermott, requested the Government Accountability Office to investigate the number of citizens who could have their land seized, the cost of property acquisitions, and the time it will take. I'm pleased the GAO has opened an inquiry. Not only is there concern the Trump administration will skirt eminent domain laws, there is a real threat that environmental laws will be tossed out the window in the administration's rush to fulfill the president's campaign promise to build 500 miles of wall. The wall would run through hundreds of miles of untouched, pristine lands that are home to wildlife like antelope, deer, javelina. A wall will tear up these lands and their vegetation, cause erosion and flooding, and cut off migratory paths for wildlife. The Department of Interior is set to transfer 500 acres of lands in New Mexico, Arizona, and California to the Army for the President's Wall. 213 of those acres are in my state. The Department of Interior is supposed to protect our natural resources, not endanger them with a border wall that will compromise their ecological value, destroy habitat connectivity, and harm wildlife. The President's Wall and his divisive rhetoric towards immigrants is deeply offensive to New Mexicans. We have strong family, cultural, and economic ties to Mexico. We are a proud multicultural state. Our diversity does not divide us. It defines us. It is our strength. Mr. President, this body holds the power of the purse, not the president. Now is the time to affirm this constitutional power and affirm the appropriations decisions we have made for our own states and the nation. We should override the president's veto and make sure that legitimate national security interests are protected by seeing that the 127 military construction projects go forward on schedule. Mr. President, I yield the floor.